This is Bill Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcast. Really appreciate you watching. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Mark Gonsalves. He's the GOP nominee for the U.S. House of Representatives in Georgia's District 7. Mr. Gonsalves is a second-generation American. He's had a varied and successful business career involved in several ventures. Mr. Gonsalves is currently a resident of Johns Creek for 9 years. He is also a husband and father, and I know he's been very active campaigning. I've had the opportunity to meet you before, and I really appreciate your taking the time to do this.
My pleasure. It's great to be with you and your audience for sure.
Well, so I'll get right to it. Could you tell us a little bit about your district?
So the 7th district with the new maps changed quite considerably from where it was in 2020. And I did run in that race in 2020, Bill. We had Rob Woodall retiring from the 7th district. He had served the district for 5 terms, 10 years in total. And it brought out a number of competitors. There were 13 of us that ran in 2020. And I didn't win my Republican primary, but I did very well. And here it is 2 years later. And not only am I the Republican nominee, but out of all those competitors from 2020, I'm the only one that didn't turn their back on the 7th district. The new lines make the 7th district up of primarily Gwinnett County, almost all of Gwinnett County, and a piece of North Fulton County, Johns Creek in specific. So that's the new maps. Certainly one of the reasons why I think some of my competitors went to other districts was simply because they knew that the lines were more difficult to win a race. But I kept telling people, it's 2022. All bets are off. People are seeing what's happened with this inflationary spiral. Now, truly the Biden-McBath recession, because she's voted 100% for all this spending and so forth. So I'm just telling you, the 7th congressional district, it's very much in play.
Had you been involved in politics prior to this, prior to 2020?
Yeah, that's a great question. I spent a lifetime building, growing, turning around businesses, had my fair share of success in that, created a great number of jobs in that process. And I never aspired ever in my adult life to be a political figure. But when I started seeing what I started seeing unfold in 2019 with our 116th Congress take their oaths of office, and we were learning about the Green New Deal, which, by the way, a lot of it is tucked into this Inflation Reduction Act. How about that for a name, huh? The Inflation Reduction Act. There's not a person, even the CBO, they know that it's not going to reduce inflation. It's a way of them tucking certain Green New Deal opportunities into that bill, though. And it also creates an environment. Imagine this, Bill. In that bill, we're going to add, 87,000 IRS agents, 0 Border Patrol agents. Does that make any sense to anyone, given the fact that we have this wide open border? So I never have aspired to be political. But now, given what we're seeing unfold in our country, I have a burning desire, a true burning desire to be a representative, to be the servant of the people of Georgia's 7th congressional district. That's what our founding fathers had in mind, and that's my objective.
So there's a couple of questions I have that I think are pertinent to this. Do you think that many of our representatives in Congress, and including some Republicans, do not understand the causes of inflation and therefore cannot get their head wrapped around a proper solution?
I think you're very right. Earlier this year, there's a woman that serves as the treasurer for Gwinnett's GOP. And she has her CPA accounting degree, and she knew I had an accounting degree. So she sent me a fairly innocuous text in the spring, and it said, "Mark, I think we need more accountants in Congress." So, of course, I picked up on that text, and it certainly created a degree of curiosity on my part. So I Googled it. And here's the first thing. The first thing that popped up was an article written by The Hill in 2018. The headline, Bill, was, "We need more accountants in Congress." So that was pretty funny. I read the article, excuse me, and the article was making a specific point that with this fact that we no longer have balanced budgets, we don't even have approved budgets coming out of Congress anymore, and that we were at that time $20+ trillion in debt. Of course, it's now gone over 30 trillion in just 4 years, which is breathtaking in its own right. That really we need more accountants because they understand fiscal responsibility. The hard number, by the way, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate, 535 in total. At that time, there were 11 people with accounting backgrounds in Congress. So you can make a very good case for what you just said. A lot of people, I know you've had a successful business career with the frozen foods industry as the CEO and so on, and congratulations on the success that you enjoyed there. But you certainly wouldn't have had the success you had if you spent money that didn't exist and you turned your back on the people that were your customers. My constituents are, in fact, my customers, right? You would have never been successful. But this is what goes on in Congress every single day. They spend money that we don't have, and they don't seem to care about what it takes for the American people to hand the national treasury their money.
There's also, I'd like to talk about this a little bit more. There's also a contingent, I think, or a portion of the population that vote for Democrats and are either truly anti-capitalist or Marxist, and there's no reason that they wouldn't want to devalue the dollar, because that means there's more government control. Now, I don't think that all Democrats take that position, but there is certainly a portion. And what do you think about that?
I think
that some people actually do understand or don't care what the causes or the solutions are to, as you put it, the inflationary spiral, but
right.
they know instinctively and inherently that means more government control, which is maybe even control of the energy sector, the healthcare, the banking, maybe even the food industries.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And you know, this Biden-McBath inflationary spiral that we have going on nationally, 9.1%, as you know. In Georgia, it's actually higher. It's 9.8%. And here's the thing about inflation. It's the most hideous form of tax bill to the people who can least afford it. So this party is supposed to be the party of the downtrodden, the working men and women. And they actually perform just the opposite. They've become the party of the elite coastal class. That's who they represent. And that's why socialism and really full-on communism, Marxism looks so attractive to them. Margaret Thatcher, said it very well many years ago. Socialism sounds great until you run out of other people's money. And we're 30 trillion in debt that we're going to pass on to generations that didn't create the debt. I have a real problem with that, because that's a form of taxation to our kids and our grandkids without their representation. And if you think about it, that's how our country was formed 246 years ago. Taxation without representation. So this is what we've done. It sounds so good that you want to give everything to everyone, but to continue to spend another $700 billion in this Inflation Reduction Act. And you ever notice how Congress always names things that turn out to be the exact opposite of what the name implies, right? The Affordable Care Act, anything but affordable. The Patriot Act, taking all of our liberties and freedoms away from us. So when I ever hear a bill's name, I automatically assume that it's going to turn out to be 100% opposite as far as the intention of the name of the bill on the burden of the American people.
Another question I have on this: do you hear the media, the financial media, even many politicians do not really explain what is pretty much a simple problem. And I think, do you think they purposely do not make an explanation? Because if you kind of have paint this picture that inflation is very complicated, then well, the average person can't understand it. So I'm the one you have to count on to solve your problems.
I think you said it well. And I think that you underestimate the intelligence of the American people when you try to dumb down everything. You can get to very simple facts, right, that are clearly understandable. But with this administration, what they want to do is they want to take a definition of the word recession as an example and completely change the definition so that they don't have to be accountable for the fact that we have 2 quarters now that our GDP is gone negative. That is the definition. We've used that definition for decade after decade after decade, and suddenly it's no longer appropriate because it's being hung around them because of the policies that they created. And you mentioned energy dependence earlier in your earlier remarks today, and I do want to touch on that because with one stroke of the pen, Bill, one stroke of the pen, the first day on the job, Joe Biden signed that executive order that shut down our Keystone pipeline, and it put shackles around our coal and our fracking industry. So we went from energy independence, which was the best move that we've had in my lifetime as far as preserving our national security interests, and we sold those interests out to adversaries that we don't really have a comfortable relationship with. And every time we go to the pump now, we're fueling the Putin war machine. This is incredible to me. History teaches us a lot of things. When our oil went over $100 a barrel, it triggered the conflict in Eastern Europe with the Ukraine. We're paying for that in many ways, not the least of which is the $60+ billion of trying to support a foreign land when we don't even secure our own borders here in this country. But now he's done it twice, Putin. When oil got over $100 a barrel, that's when he went into Crimea. That's when he went into Georgia. So that action on day one of the administration has caused this rippling effect, including the inflation, including the supply chain challenges that we have. Look at moms. Can you imagine this administration, which I say has no formula? They literally didn't even have formula for our mothers with infants, going hat in hand to other parts of the world to try to get baby formula for mothers who needed it. That's not the representation of the world superpower. I can tell you that.
What do you think it will take for Congress to pass a balanced budget?
Well, first of all, it's going to take great resolve. And I don't know if we have it. One of the things that I pride myself in is because I'm an outsider to this, I do have the courage of my convictions. What I see in Congress is not only don't the players in many cases have the courage of their convictions, but Bill, they don't have any convictions at all. They just go wherever the political winds blow them. You have to have a compass that steers you, that gives you that resolve, that gives you that backbone. So it has to start somewhere. And isn't it ironic, right? We are over 30 trillion in debt. But have you had Congress elevate this problem to a meaningful conversation? No. I was talking about this in the 2020 race. And at that time, it was 22 trillion in debt. Now we're over 30 trillion in debt. And we still don't have a conversation. I don't propose to say that I have the answers to 30 trillion in debt, but I do say by starting the conversation, that conversation will create debate. That debate will create good ideas. And from those good ideas can actually come solutions for the American people. But the American people don't have a printing press in their own basement or their own garage. Congress, however, does. So we continue to inflate the money supply, which of course turns around and creates inflation. That's the real answer to your previous question. What causes it? That's what causes it. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. And when you got a supply chain disruption, you can see how that adds to the equation there.
You may not know the answer to this question, but because you're the incumbent, Lucy McBath, do you think she understands this, or she understands it and it's something that's so ingrained in the Democrat Party and she has to toe the line? Or what do you think is motivating this sort of head in the sand, or it's purposeful, I guess?
Well, I think that there's many parts to the answer to that question. First off, if Lucy McBath was on the screen with me, she would probably be advocating for good school environments for our kids to get a good education. She would probably be advocating for better jobs for the people of the 7th district. She would be advocating for better health care for the people of the 7th district. She would be advocating for all these things. Where her and I differ, literally the difference, Bill, the size of the Grand Canyon, is she believes that all of that is accomplished through the government coercion. She believes in bigger government. She believes more spending is the answer. And how do you claw back money when you're spending more? You tax people more, which is exactly what's embedded in this bill, as you know. So her approach to the challenges is misguided. She's not using the principles of America's exceptionalism, which is free market enterprise, which is self-determination. These are the differences between their party and our party. I believe that she actually is a very left-leaning individual. And I believe that by looking at her voting record. I'll give you an example. Let's look at the border, right? We see what's happening at our southern border. We're outraged when there is a tragedy, an absolute tragic event, like a school shooting, right? But we don't seem to care about 100,000 of our fellow citizens being killed through fentanyl streaming over our southern border. We don't seem to have a problem with the human and sex trafficking that comes streaming over our southern border. We don't seem to have a problem when we're talking about gang members coming into our communities, coming over that southern border. We don't seem to have a problem with the fact that we have terrorists now that have come over that southern border that do not wish our country well. And you know how many terrorists it takes to create great mayhem in our country? One. That's how many. So you look at me, I'm strong on the border. I'm for strong border security. That's why I mentioned 87,000 IRS agents versus 0 border patrol. We've turned border patrol under this administration, Bill, into welcome wagon.
What do you think is driving that?
And Lucy, going back to Lucy for a second, she has an F- rating on immigration. Just go to numbersusa.com. They look at every member of Congress. They're not picking her out, but they're assigning her a score, and her score is an F-. On the Freedom Index, and I constantly talk about freedom, she's at a 5% rating, 5%. And what that index indicates is her voting record against the constitutional merits of the bills that she's voting on. To give you an idea, she's at 5%. The worst performing Republican in the House of Representatives from our great state of Georgia is at 80%. The best is at 95%. So anyone that thinks that our Republican contingent in Congress isn't upholding the freedoms that made us a prosperous and great country and made us so attractive for all those seeking freedom and opportunity from all parts of this world, they're missing the boat here. She's at 5%. 5. She's voted 100% of the time with Nancy Pelosi. She's voted virtually 100% of the time with AOC and the squad. She's voted virtually 100% of the time with Joe Biden himself. So she cannot lay claim to being the person who wants to put these things back together. She's the cause of the problem. You know, there's the old saying, right? A recession is when your neighbor loses their job. A depression is when you lose your job. And a recovery will be when Lucy McBath loses her job.
What do you think is driving the Biden administration to have these open border policies?
They want to reshape America. You've heard them say it now. They're public about it. They're talking about a liberal world order. That's not a phrase that I came up with. That's a phrase that's coming out of this administration in Joe Biden's mouth himself. That should make every American pause, because a liberal world order is code for a one world government, a new world order. If you look at this bill that they now have changed the name of to the Inflation Reduction Act, it actually is based in Build Back Better. That was the framework for this bill. Now, why that should be a concern to every American is we believe in America first. We believe in America's exceptionalism. We believe in our uniquely American freedoms that have offered us so much. And so many people, Bill, men and women, have fought so bravely for those freedoms, many of which have given their ultimate devotion to our country with their lives to preserve and protect those freedoms. And those freedoms will not exist with a one world government. This Build Back Better is used by virtually every political figure around the world now. Prime Minister Trudeau, Macron in France, the woman in New Zealand, Ardern, I think is how you pronounce her last name, Ardern, Spain, Germany, Boris in the UK. When they all start using the same phrase, Build Back Better, then you know by definition that's not an America First agenda. By definition, it's not. So I just hope that we realize where we're heading in this great nation of ours. Reagan said it better than I can. We're one generation away from losing our freedom. And if we do, there's no other place for us to go. So you have a wide order. You're trying to reshape America. And that reshaping of America comes with the loss of our exceptionalism, our freedoms, and our America First agenda. We'll soon be run by unelected officials in some far off land controlling a world government. Is that what we want in this country? I don't think so.
In other words, the new world order, in your opinion, trumps the average citizen's interests.
Correct. America was formed with God's hand on our country. We established our unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This was the great experiment. And that great experiment lifted more people out of poverty than any experiment ever tried in human history. Is capitalism, free market enterprise, can it be messy? Yes, it can be messy. But it's also the best thing that's ever come to the sovereign land of the United States of America or any other country. We are the experiment that worked, that actually worked to create prosperity and create freedom and lift more people out of bad circumstances than any other country. So are we perfect? No. In our founding documents, it says it very clearly. In order to form a more perfect union, it doesn't say we're perfect, but our desire to become more perfect is embedded in our founding documents. How exciting is that? But we have people on the left that want to extinguish our Constitution, that says it's some sort of a racist document today. Really, really, when we've done so much for not only the citizens of our country, but for so many around this world. And we have always been this beacon of freedom and beacon of opportunity where people abandoned their own countries to come here. And when I'm out on the campaign trail and I'm talking about freedom first, that's the name of my platform, freedom first. And I talk about it, inevitably, Bill, somebody comes over to me and says, Mark, boy, you hit it right on the head. You hit it right on the head. I came from, and they fill in the blank. I came from Venezuela. I came from Cuba. I came from the former Soviet Union. I came from China. Fill in the blank. What I'm seeing now in America, they tell me, is what I left behind. Every country has the right, I would argue, it's an obligation to its citizens to secure their borders and enforce their immigration law. And we're doing neither. What we'd rather do is sick 87,000 more IRS agents on the American people. That's why I'm for the fair tax, which, by the way, was born in Georgia's 7th district.
I wanted to ask you about that too, because that's a tax policy that you advocate. Just explain what you're advocating for, because a lot of people may not. I mean, honestly, if you ask many Democrat voters and even politicians, what's the maximum amount that somebody should pay, they will probably say 25%, not understanding that if you lived in California, you pay in the highest brackets, you pay more than the highest brackets in Sweden if you add everything up. So,
sure. And they're also all the other hidden taxes that you pay. So it's not just your income tax, it's all the other taxes that you do pay with everything that you purchase, whether it's gas or anything else. So the nice part about this fair tax is it actually has a prebate, which does take care of those that are less fortunate. So they don't have a significant tax burden, an undue tax burden based on their circumstance. That prebate does solve that particular part of the equation. But as a consumption-based tax, Bill, if you want to go purchase a new yacht, right? Terrific. Well, you're going to end up giving our national treasury a nice piece of that spend. If you want to be more frugal and maybe put those dollars to starting yet another company, maybe you want to get back into the world like you were once before, then fantastic. You put those dollars to work in that way to build our economy and create opportunity, which also, of course, creates a base of more taxation for the fair tax. So as a consumption-based tax, the two things I like about it is, number one, it creates an environment where everyone now would have a stake in the funding of their government. And at the same time, taking into consideration a person's circumstance, right? And then number two is, would it be able to do away with the IRS as we know it today? And that would be a very positive thing. You give your tax information to 5 accountants and they come out with 5 different answers. That to me is the definition of a flawed bureaucracy right there. 80,000 pages of tax code. Who's going to read 80,000 pages? Who's going to know intimately 80,000 pages? That's why you have 5 different answers to your tax questions when you try to be able to file your taxes. So we have to simplify it. The American people are spending far too much time trying to appease the government and less time trying to be good husbands, good fathers, good members of the community, great workers, building companies. This is what happens when you have undue regulation. And by the way, what's the party that loves regulation? The Democrats sure seem to love regulation.
along with some Republicans as well.
Yes, that's true. I would grant you that.
I searched your website. This is kind of I ask these questions not as a journalist, but as a constituent. I've always thought that the Section 230 might have been well intended, but it's antiquated, and there wasn't the foresight of, well, gosh, what happens if this is in everyone's home? You can get defamed, and not even a defamatory statement can be made about you. You might not ever even know that it's made about you with social media, and it's just. So, what do you think the changes ought to be made to that law? And a lot of people may not understand what the law is, so you might want to fill them in on that too.
The point that you're trying to make in regard to Section 230, which is part of the Communications Decency Act, I refer to it in regard to the overreach by big tech today. Big tech has far too much power. And what's happened is big tech has used that power to be able to censor conservative voices, including the sitting president of the United States of America at one point. And that wasn't that long ago. So we have over 250,000 conservative voices that have now been banned or censored from the internet, these various platforms. This is very, very dangerous for our representative republic bill. And the reason why is because our free speech is so fundamental to our exceptionalism. It's truly the cornerstone. I talk about our freedoms and I talk about our economic freedom. I go at great lengths talking about our medical freedom, our freedom to associate and assemble, of course, practice our religious faith. And the most important one of them all is our freedom of speech. But big tech has censored a big part of it. They use these things called fact checkers, right? Who are these fact checkers? What kind of experience do they have to be so learned that they know what is right and what is wrong? So here's the thing. What we've done is we've taken a fundamental principle of our exceptionalism, our free speech, which creates the battle of ideas. May the best idea win. That's different than other countries. You don't have a battle of ideas in China. You don't have a battle of ideas in Cuba. You don't have a battle of ideas in Venezuela. You didn't have a battle of ideas in the former Soviet Union. So when you say, we're going to put one idea forward and we're going to censor the other side of that idea so that this idea functions in a vacuum without debate, without true debate from the other side, that becomes incredibly dangerous. And by the way, if the world had been reversed as far as big tech and it was run by conservatives and they were censoring liberal and progressive voices, I would be as vocal on that as I am right now for conservative voices, because I know how dangerous it would be the opposite direction. But yes, nobody seems to care. So this whole thing, we had Elon Musk, right, proposing buying Twitter. And me, like many others, we got excited about that prospect. Maybe it'll still go through. We'll see what happens here. But it was ironic to me that literally within minutes of him putting forth his bid to buy Twitter, the left became enraged. Oh my gosh, look what he's doing, right? And I'm thinking to myself, this is one platform out of a number of platforms that function as a monopoly in big tech. Why are they screaming so loudly? Why are they screaming so loudly? So how we do this is we can use Section 230 to make them liable. This would be very important to be able to bring debate back. Social media is basically the town square of the olden days, right? Person stood up on their soapbox, literally a box that used to transport soap. That's how it got called a soapbox. And they would elevate over the gathered people so that they could have their voice in the town square. That's what social media platforms represent today, the modern day town square. But yet we shut a person down. They don't get a chance to step on that soapbox. And that's wrong for our representative republic. So if we're not willing to go there, then we could use the Sherman Antitrust Act. It worked with the telephone company. It worked with the railroads. So there's ways to be able to break up this monopolistic hold on our conversation here in America. This is really important. And yet, do we have any convictions on this in Congress? No, not at all. Why not? We bring them forward to various hearings, right? We have the Zuckerbergs walk in there. We have the Twitter guy walk in there. We have the Google guy walk in there. And what do we accomplish? We get some nice talking points for members of Congress to take back and fundraise with their constituents. And yet nothing happens. It only gets worse. I'm a product of it myself. You can look at my own Twitter feed. You know, I'm definitely shadow banned on Twitter. So that's the.
You make several really good, important points that even Republicans, there's no appetite with a lot of Republicans to change this because they can fundraise off of it. That's kind of cynical, but there wasn't a big push to amend this when Republicans were in the majority. So you would favor amending rather than doing away with Section 230. You favor amending it to hold these companies accountable.
They need to be held accountable. And, we're just at the early stages of this. I wish every American would take the time, if they haven't done it, or if they haven't done it in a while, to go back and read 1984, read Brave New World, and see what's written, even Fahrenheit 451 for that matter. These books really portended the future. And if people read those books now, they would be thinking, wow, look how much of what I thought was fiction is actually turned into reality now. It's really breathtaking. So I don't know how much further we have to go into the rabbit hole, but I sure hope that this November 8th election is as consequential to take back our country as I believe it will be.
That's very helpful talking about Section 230. So this is something that's been in all in the media, and I've asked Democrats about it. Democrats running for Congress, I've asked them this question: a national law regarding abortion restrictions. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm a constitutionalist, so anything that wasn't a provision in our Constitution that should be assigned to the states, I'm in favor of. So now with the reversal of Roe v. Wade, which was an opinion from our Supreme Court, it was never a law. But having said that, we do have our law here in Georgia. And of course, every other state has their law. And that's the answer to the abortion question.
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
So many localities are experiencing this huge uptick in violent crime. What do you think the federal government's role is in that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think first of all, it should really start with the President of the United States. I think the President of the United States should set the tone in regard to what is the moral compass of our country. Right now, we have an effort to, of course, defund and minimize the role of law enforcement when we've proven just over the last couple of years what a folly that view has turned into. That's why I'm also such a strong Second Amendment person, Bill. Our right to keep and bear arms is a very, very key piece to our freedom as a nation. So I don't want any compromise there. And the reason why is because I know that compromise leads to more compromise, which means less and less freedom for the people to protect their family, to protect their property, to protect their community. There was once a very prosperous nation, had great natural resources, a very industrious workforce, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful country. And then in 2012, they came and took the people's guns. And very quickly, it moved from all those wonderful things I just described to oppression, and then socialism, and now full-on communism. And that nation is Venezuela. So anyone that doesn't think it can happen fast, that should be a very, very, very good signpost in history.
This seems like an issue that everybody would agree upon. What are some other issues you think Republicans and Democrats do agree upon? Because the media and politicians like to point out the contrast because it's in their interest, or they perceive it to be in their interest.
Yeah, I would say the number one is the education of our children. Now, I think that we could, at the macro level, all agree on that. I think Democrats would agree that we want the best education possible for our children. Republicans certainly feel that way. But what they determine as education is where the difference lies. How they define education today and how we would define education as conservatives are two vastly different things. So right now in our school systems, we're teaching things like CRT, the 1619 Project. We're bringing pornographic materials, pedophilia, into our school systems. We're bringing sex education into school systems when it should be the responsibility of the parent or parents to do that education, not a school system. So fundamentally, I think we want both parties to have a great educational system for our children, but how we define what that really looks like and what it is, those are two vastly different things. That's why we need to get together on this. That's why I'm for, by the way, abolishing the Department of Education. We spend $102 billion on the Department of Education. We started it in the early 70s, if you remember, right? We've created this behemoth of a bureaucracy. Well, at the time that we created it, we were the world's leader in education, literally top of the class, right? Countries came from all over the world to our great country to learn how they can educate their own citizens better. And now look where we are. I had a guy last night at an event. He said, Mark, we're number 46 on the world stage. I said, well, I'm not going to disagree with that number. I've seen different numbers in the 30s and the 40s. Depends on what ranking you want to take a look at. But clearly, we're very, very far removed from where we once were. And isn't it ironic that we have moved so far down the ladder, yet we spend far more per child in education? Why is that? So top down has failed. What happens in education for best practices is when it incubates from the bottom up, where you have a local school system that does something exceptional and people see the results and they go, you know what, we want to copy that. But we have bureaucrats and academics pushing it down from the top. So we push it all the way down, Common Core, right? And we end up with horrific results, and it becomes far more universal instead of catching something that really didn't work and say, yeah, we'll do away with that. Let's come up with another plan locally. So I want to see education be as close to the student as possible. The funding of that education as close to the student as possible. In Gwinnett County, people moved to Gwinnett County in droves because of the educational environment. It was the number one school system. It's a far cry today from being number one. The hard number is number 66 in the state of Georgia. That's how far it's fallen so quickly. I go, Bill, to the school board meetings. I sit in on those school board meetings. What I hear the parents talk about is breathtaking. It's breathtaking.
Yes,
and,
I've done.
one person come up to me and goes, Mark, the school board, it's really not the jurisdiction of a congressman. I said, I understand that. But my responsibility to every single person in this room is something that I care greatly about. That's why I'm sitting in this school board meeting. I want to know exactly what the citizens of this great county and this great district are talking about, thinking about, feeling. When you have a child that takes the podium, like I observed earlier this year, the first one that night, by the way, you have 30 citizens that can take their 3 minutes of limited speech with our Gwinnett County School Board. So this young child, she takes the podium, a high school student, and she has her remarks very nicely prepared. And she delivered them, Bill, very poignantly. And at the end of her remarks, she said, she was talking about being bullied in school. And she said, it's okay, I'm okay. And then her guardian holds up a picture for the school board. She says, this is my friend so-and-so. This is my friend so-and-so. This is my friend. She concludes her remarks by saying, my 5 friends, they weren't able to handle it as well as I could. They all committed suicide. That was openers at the beginning of this year. It put my wife and I right in the back of our chair. So anyone that thinks that our school systems are functioning well, given the fact that we spend in Gwinnett County $2.8 billion, by far the biggest budget in the state of Georgia for our education. We hand over 180,000 of our most important possessions, our children. We have the largest employer in Gwinnett County, our school system. 24,000 people are employed. And now we're number 66. So the things that are being tried are failing miserably. They're failing miserably.
Since you brought that up, I've done a few episodes on the Gwinnett County School Board, observed the videos of their meetings, and
yes,
the topic, just so viewers will know this, the topics are not centered on the important basic things, but on anti-racism. There's a parade of students that will talk about this. They'll talk about, they don't use the word discrimination, but it's not centered on the things that you're talking about, the basics. This is, I think, turned over pretty quickly. This I don't know really how this will end, but a lot of parents, I think, are very concerned of moving their kids out of the Gwinnett County school system.
Well, and that's the thing. Look what's happened, Bill, across this country.
Well, it's happened in it's happened in so many different other localities as well.
And the litmus test is what's going on with homeschooling. So once the pandemic happened, and now parents, for the first time, were really getting a clear insight into what their kids were being taught. This is what has brought this forward into the national conversation now. Homeschooling has doubled. And it's not an easy thing to homeschool a child when you're a two-income household. So that gives you an idea of how parents view our school system today. So homeschooling, to me, is the sign that is clearly not working. Now in Gwinnett County, we have something emerging called Learning 2025. It's not the principles that you and I grew up with: reading, writing, arithmetic. Remember the 3 R's. We have STEM now, and STEAM gaining some momentum for sure, which is a good move in the right direction. But we have to be able to have the money follow the child now, so that parents have options, that they don't feel burdened by an educational environment that's not serving their children well. I think this is very important. And by the way, Gwinnett County, back the last semester, they were still under a mask mandate when other counties had ended that mandate considerably earlier than that. I was on the sidewalks with the moms. We were in Peachtree Corners. I'll never forget it. We're in front of the Pickneyville Middle School. There were about 20 moms, and we went there every day with our signs, asking for the kids to have that choice, right? Not have it be a mandate. And I'll never forget it, Bill. There's certain things that happen on the campaign trail that you will never forget. And that first day that I was on that sidewalk is a day that I will never forget. A car pulls up. The crossing guard has the car stopped so that it can take the left into the school. Mother driving, the young middle schooler in his passenger seat, and he's looking at my sign. He's looking at me. He zips his window down. He sticks his head out. He goes, "Thanks for fighting for me." I said, "You're worth fighting for."
It's amazing. That's amazing.
The kids know how ridiculous a lot of this actually is.
It is a sad situation. There's a couple other questions. I really appreciate you taking all this time to talk to me. A couple of questions I want to ask you. So there was a bill this Congress convened to institutionalize mail-in voting. And I asked this question, and I get some strange looks because they don't seem to understand the question. So I'll ask it verbatim. Is it unreasonable for citizens to believe that voting ought to be done in secrecy?
Well, that certainly doesn't have anything to do with mail-in voting, right? So absentee ballots, I'm in favor of absentee ballots for specific circumstances. If you were out of the country, you served in our military, yes, an absentee ballot is very appropriate. We have, in this coming election, early voting that will start here in Georgia on October 17th. October 17th for a November 8th election. So you're going to have 3 weeks to be able to vote Monday through Sunday, 7 days a week, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So anyone that doesn't think that they have the opportunity to be able to cast their vote, I would take great exception with that. There's certain provisions that we had now in the House Bill 202, right, that changed some of the things that went on in the 2020 election, which I think will shore up some of the areas that people have great concerns about. Is it a perfect bill? No, I wouldn't say it's a perfect bill, but hopefully it can bring a greater level of security to our elections and give the people of Georgia's 7th district and our great state of Georgia more comfort in the fact that this election will be conducted in a fair manner, in a free and fair manner. So your privacy of your vote, yes, when you go in, that's a provision of how we vote to begin with. So I don't know what you voted. I can't look up what your voting record is. I can see if you pulled a Republican ballot or a Democrat ballot in a primary, which gives me an indication of potentially where your political leanings may be. But I don't know the individual people that you voted for on the ballot, or even if you voted in certain elections that were part of that ballot, whether it's a Secretary of State's race or the governor's race or a congressional race or a judgeship or any other election that was part of that ballot.
It just seems to me that if you have universal voting by mail, there would be the idea of voting in secret would just go away. In other words, people would vote, other people would observe the vote, their neighbors, their family, coerce, sell their vote. There's a lot of folks that are apathetic voters.
You know, I would say this. One of the things that I find very troublesome, and I hear this word used a lot now, of how convenient, the words being used, convenience. It was very convenient for me to vote. And that really disturbs me. And the reason why is because I believe that your right to vote in this country is a sacred right. And with that sacred right comes responsibility. I think that you should place responsibility in regard to the action of voting. It shouldn't be a matter of convenience. I think that really trivializes the actual event of voting in the first place. Our government is from the consent of the governed. And with that consent comes massive responsibility, because the people that we put forth are the ones that are going to shape our nation. They're going to shape our future. It's going to shape the world stage. That's not something to look at from a lens of pure convenience now, is it? So I would just really hope that my fellow citizens appreciate the fact that with that vote, I've been in other countries. I've seen what it's like when they vote. I've seen lines that have extended literally hours and hours and hours long so that they could vote. I don't think those people, and they only did it that one day, by the way. They didn't have early voting for 3 weeks, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It costs us $25,000 a day. You want to know the hard cost to administer that in Gwinnett County. So it's a responsibility. We should see it that way. It should be communicated that way by every political figure. And it should be really championed by every president of the United States of America.
The last question I had was regarding term limits.
Yes.
What do you think of term limits, and why should they be
you can see the term limit clearly articulated there. I was the first in the 2020 race to actually pledge for term limits. I really, really believe that our founding fathers never intended for members of Congress, or the presidency for that matter, to be a career. Now we do have term limits with our president, right? At one time we did not. So to think that Congress would be immune from term limits, I think that the presidency itself is a sign that it can be done. Now the question becomes, how do you get Congress to vote themselves out of a job? That's a heck of a question, right? That's a very, very good question. So I think the way that we could actually have our representatives from across this country do the right thing is by literally, when they sign term limits into law, they actually go on the same meter that it is from day one. So in other words, let's just suppose that we used term limits, pick the time frame. I don't really have in my mind a hard and fast number. Should it be 10 years for a congressman and congresswoman? Possibly that might be the right number. You know, the Senate, 2 terms at 6 years, that's 12 years. Should we have 2 years less for members of the House versus 12 versus 8? You could make some, good arguments from a variety of different perspectives there. But if you voted on the law, that meter started then. So if you were a sitting member of Congress and you already served 16 years, let's say, right, in the House, then you would have 10 more years and your time would run out. So that's how they could do the right thing, but be able to continue on in the role that they may want to continue on in. Now, one of the things I hear out on the campaign trail, this doesn't happen so much now, but it did in 2020 to an extent. People would say, no, Mark, you don't understand. We already term limit them out. And I said, really? How do you suggest that we do that? They said, well, we do it with our vote. I said, well, I'm so glad that you brought that up because I actually did the homework on this. And since 1964, every 2-year cycle, right? Presidential, midterm, since 1964, that's a lot of data. Here's what the actual data provides in the way of a reality check. The fact of the matter is in the US House of Representatives, the incumbent wins the worst performing year since 1964. The incumbent won 85% of the time. The best performing year, the incumbent won 98% of the time. So the point that I'm trying to make is if you have Congress that has a lower approval rating than a used car salesman today, so how can you say if the rating is down in the teens somewhere, maybe even less, how is 85 to 98% of the people getting reelected if you think that you vote them out with your vote? The reason why they stay in is because they have massive name ID. They have great access to fundraising and power. That's a very difficult combination for someone to be able to flip. So those are the hard pieces of data, and that's why term limits become so important. Do we honestly believe that the people who have been in Congress for all these years are serving the interests of the people well anymore? Most people would say no. I don't think that they are. So this is a way to return back to what our founding fathers had in mind when they constructed the Congress the way they did.
There's no question that many politicians that are elected in not only Congress, but or House of Representatives, but the Senate, view this as a business. Joe Biden, he said this many times, used the word business. I've been in this business for X amount of years and so forth and so on. So I think this is just interesting.
Right.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Well, I would just, again, go back to my platform of freedom. I do feel like America faces a consequential question in our history, and that is, do we want the boot of government control squarely on our necks, or do we want our God-given right to freedom? So freedom must come first. As conservatives, yes, we want an America first agenda, but I'm suggesting without those freedoms coming first, there's no America first. So this election is very consequential. It'll give us a chance to turn Congress back around, be a great block for the next couple of years. And hopefully 2024 will bring a conservative back to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and we can right an awful lot of wrongs that are going on in our country and bring prosperity, hope, and really pride back in our country. What I see is I just think that for most people, I talk to them all day long, they're feeling great pain, they're feeling great anxiety. And no matter how wealthy you might be, you're feeling these effects. So for the person who is struggling to commute to their place of work, be able to provide for their family with clothing and shelter and food, versus the guy that might, or gal that may have a 401k that they've seen turn into a 301k, and it gets them concerned about the future. The inflationary spiral that not only hurts day to day, but literally the savings that you have are becoming less and less valuable every day. So if you're a senior, fixed income, you're seeing your buying power literally being vaporized with this inflationary environment. So that's what I observe. I'd like to bring critical thinking, common sense back to Congress. I don't have all the answers. No one does. But at least they know that they would have somebody there that does have a backbone, that does have resolve to do the right thing for the people that they are there to serve. I work for the people of the 7th Congressional District. They do not work for me or our government. It's the other way around. We work for them. It's a principle that we've seemed to have lost along the way.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. Mr. Mark Gonsalves is U.S. Republican nominee for the Georgia's District 7 of the U.S. House of Representatives. And how can people find you?
Yeah, well, you referenced the website. That's certainly a great place to go. It's Mark for, and we do spell out the word for, F-O-R, Mark for Georgia, and we spell out Georgia as well. So it's markforgeorgia.com. You can even see my cell phone number on there. So if you want to pick up the phone and give me a call, I'd be more than interested to hear what you have to say. And you know what? It all starts with communication, conversation. A lot can get accomplished. We need to bring our country back together. John Adams said it very well, Bill. He said, our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate for the governance of any other.
Well, thanks for doing this. You've been watching the Different Take podcast with Bill Griffin. I appreciate you watching. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. And new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays. Thanks for watching.